Our relationship, I think at that point, things were coming down on us pretty hard, and we started to take care of each other a lot more.
Yeah. We did 72 of those.
The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was one of the boldest and most talked about TV shows of the 1960s, hosted by real-life brothers Tom and Dick Smothers. The show aired on CBS and quickly became known for its mix of humor, music, and political commentary. But what made it even more unforgettable was a moment that wasn't planned, wasn't approved, and somehow made it onto national television. That moment, often referred to as the blooper, happened on September 17, 1967, during a performance by the rock band The Who. The cameras accidentally captured something explosively. The band was playing their hit song, My Generation, when drummer Keith Moon secretly packed his drum kit with way more explosives than the crew expected. When the song ended, Moon detonated the explosives, sending smoke, debris, and chaos all over the stage. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't safe. It wasn't even in the script. It was pure, uncontrolled rebellion, and it made TV history. This wild performance left guitarist Pete Townshend with permanent hearing loss. And the moment the explosion happened, he grabbed Tom Smothers' acoustic guitar and smashed it on stage, shocking the hosts, the audience, and the network. But to understand why this moment mattered so much, we have to go back in time. The Smothers Brothers didn't just show up on TV one day, they had a long, emotional journey. Their story began with tragedy. Their father, Major Thomas B. Smothers Jr., was an Army officer during World War II. He was captured in the Philippines. After Japan invaded, he survived the Bataan Death March, one of the most brutal marches in military history. But he died in a Japanese prison camp before the war ended. Some say he was cremated. Others say he was buried at sea. What we know for sure is that he never came home. Tom and Dick's mother, Ruth, raised them alone. It wasn't easy. She worked hard to support them, and they grew up in California with little money and a lot of struggle. But those early years shaped their sense of humor. Instead of turning bitter, they turned to comedy as a way to cope. It was the start of something powerful. Their first big break came in 1959, at a nightclub in San Francisco called the Purple Onion. They were booked for 2 weeks. That 2 weeks turned into 36 weeks because audiences couldn't get enough of their act. They mixed folk music with comedy in a way that felt new and fresh. What made them different was how real they were. They didn't pretend to be perfect. They teased each other on stage just like real brothers do. Tom was the silly one, always getting into trouble. Dick played the straight man, trying to keep things under control. Their famous line, "Mom always liked you best," made audiences laugh because it felt honest, and it was. It wasn't an act. That kind of honesty made people love them. In 1961, they released their first record, Smothers Brothers, at the Purple Onion, and it was a hit. That opened the doors to TV. And before long, CBS saw their potential. CBS needed help. On Sunday nights, they were losing the ratings battle to NBC's Bonanza, one of the biggest shows in the country. So they took a chance and gave Tom and Dick their own show. That show became the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, which premiered on February 5, 1967. At first, it looked like just another variety show, music, jokes, and celebrity guests. But it didn't take long for people to realize this show was different. They weren't afraid to talk about real issues. They joked about the Vietnam War. They criticized politicians. They brought on musical guests like Pete Seeger, who had been banned from TV for years because of his anti-war views. The show was smart, bold, and unpredictable, and young people loved it. Within 2 weeks, it was beating Bonanza in the ratings. That was a big deal. It meant the younger generation had found their voice on TV. It meant change was coming. Tom Smothers had insisted on total creative control before they started the show, and CBS agreed, mostly because they were desperate for a hit. But once the show started pushing political boundaries, CBS got nervous. They began to censor jokes, cut songs, and review every single second before it aired. But Tom and Dick didn't back down. In fact, they leaned into it. They made jokes about the censorship. They played games with the network. Sometimes they would deliver a clean version of the show for review, then switch in a more daring version at the last minute before airing. It drove CBS crazy, but it kept the spirit of the show alive. The writers on the show were some of the best in the business. People like Steve Martin, Rob Reiner, Lorne Michaels, and David Steinberg all got their start on the Comedy Hour. These young writers brought a fresh, rebellious energy to TV that had never been seen before. Their work influenced future shows, like Saturday Night Live and All in the Family. They weren't just writing jokes, they were challenging the system. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour wasn't just about laughs. It was about truth. It was about giving a voice to the people and ideas that mainstream television usually ignored. That's why it became such an important show in American history. And that's why what happened on September 17, 1967, during The Who's performance, was more than just a blooper. It was a symbol of everything the show stood for. When Keith Moon's drum exploded on live TV, it wasn't just a loud noise, it was a statement. A moment of pure chaos that couldn't be controlled, edited, or silenced. That's what made it unforgettable, but it also showed the dangers of pushing too far. Pete Townshend's hearing was permanently damaged. The blast knocked over band members and stunned the audience into silence before they erupted into cheers. And Tom Smothers' guitar was smashed without warning. It was exciting, shocking, and a little bit scary. And it stayed in people's minds for decades. That wasn't the only time the show took risks. In 1968, the brothers invited Joan Baez to the show. She wanted to dedicate her song to her husband, David Harris, who was going to jail for refusing the military draft. But CBS cut most of her dedication out of the final show. They were scared of upsetting the government and advertisers. Even President Lyndon B. Johnson personally complained about the show and called CBS late at night to demand they tone things down. After Johnson, Richard Nixon also pressured the network. The government didn't like that a comedy show was influencing so many young viewers. When Harry Belafonte appeared on the show, he sang while images of police violence played in the background. The performance was powerful, but CBS didn't air it. Instead, they sold the airtime to Republican campaign ads. The very message that the performance had been protesting was replaced by political ads supporting the other side. That was when people began to see just how far the network would go to silence voices that spoke out. As things got worse, CBS put more pressure on the show. They demanded that every script, joke, and song lyric be reviewed 10 days before airing. Writers had to submit, revise, and resubmit constantly. The process became a nightmare. Some jokes were cut. Some entire segments were pulled. Tom and Dick created a sketch that made fun of the censorship itself, with Tom acting as a censor cutting people off mid-sentence as the punchline. Total silence. But CBS refused to air that sketch. They didn't think it was funny. They thought it made them look bad. Elaine May appeared in a similar sketch with a powerful line. "If we're not allowed to say anything important, we're just fooling you with empty jokes." That sketch was also cut. It became clear that censorship wasn't just a problem, it was taking over the entire show. Despite all this, the Smothers Brothers kept fighting. They continued to push boundaries. They used humor as a weapon. But CBS was ready to strike back. In April 1969, they canceled the show. Officially, the reason was that Tom and Dick didn't submit an episode on time, but everyone knew the real reason. The network had had enough. Even though the Comedy Hour was one of the top 10 shows in the country, CBS pulled the plug. The cancellation caused a media storm. The New York Times wrote editorials defending the brothers. Fans sent letters. Artists and politicians spoke out. It became a national conversation about free speech. Tom Smothers said it best. "They're not just canceling our show. They're trying to shut down the truth." The brothers didn't walk away quietly. They sued CBS for breach of contract, and after 4 years in court, they won. The judge ruled in their favor and ordered CBS to pay $776,300, which is over $5.5 million in today's money. It was a big victory, but also a bittersweet one. The damage had already been done. Their show was gone. Their voice was silenced, and even though they had won the legal fight, the cultural war had moved on. CBS replaced their show with a safer, lighter program called Hee Haw, which focused on country music and comedy that avoided politics. That show ran for 23 seasons. It was Clear Network's preferred entertainment that didn't rock the boat. The Smothers Brothers tried to make a comeback. In 1970, they brought their act to ABC, but the mood had changed. The war was still going on, but the public was tired. The rebellious energy of the late 60s was fading. ABC asked them to tone it down, and the audience didn't respond the same way. The show didn't last. Then, in 1975, they tried again with a new show on NBC. The first episode was a hit, reaching one of the highest ratings of the year. But behind the scenes, there were problems. The producer didn't get along with Tom and Dick. They weren't allowed to talk to writers or control the direction of the show. Slowly, the energy faded, and NBC canceled the show halfway through the season. In 1988, almost 20 years after CBS fired them, the Smothers Brothers were invited back for a reunion special called the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, the 20th reunion. It aired on CBS and was well received. Old fans tuned in, and critics enjoyed the nostalgic feel. Writers like Steve Martin and Bob Einstein returned to contribute, and the show earned 3 Primetime Emmy nominations. It was a gentle reminder of the impact they had made, but it didn't carry the same fire. It was a softer, safer version of what once had been a revolutionary show. Later that year, CBS even brought them back for a full revival season, but timing was tough. The Writers Guild was on strike, and the brothers had to rely on older material. Once the strike ended, new scripts helped improve the show, and they even earned 5 Emmy nominations. But television had moved on. The show ran for 2 seasons, from 1988 to 1989. But it never reached the same heights. Even so, the legacy of the Smothers Brothers never faded. In 2022, the University of California, Santa Barbara accepted their entire archive into their performing arts collection. Contracts, tapes, letters, and photos are now preserved for future generations. Curators said their contribution to free speech and comedy deserved to be honored forever. And they were right. The Smothers Brothers proved that comedy can challenge power, that it can say what others are afraid to say. Before Saturday Night Live, before The Daily Show, before Last Week Tonight, there was the Smothers Brothers. Their show ran from 1967 to 1969, but it influenced decades of television. They helped launch the careers of Steve Martin, Rob Reiner, George Carlin, and many more. They gave a voice to Joan Baez, Pete Seeger, and Harry Belafonte, artists who used music to demand change. They brought the Beatles, Hey Jude, and Revolution to American audiences in ways no other show could. They gave The Who a national stage one that exploded in every way imaginable. Their willingness to speak the truth, even when it cost them everything, inspired generations of comedians, musicians, and thinkers. It reminded people that television could be more than entertainment. It could be a platform for truth, courage, and change. Looking back, the blooper during The Who's performance might have been accidental, but it captured the spirit of the show perfectly. Unfiltered, loud, unapologetic, and unforgettable. That moment, like the Smothers Brothers themselves, refused to be silenced. And maybe, just maybe, that's why people still talk about it today. Even though the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour ended decades ago, its influence still echoes in the way comedy and television work today. Tom and Dick Smothers didn't just make people laugh, they made people think. They challenged the idea that comedy had to be safe, neutral, and agreeable. They proved that jokes could be powerful tools for change. At a time when American households were glued to their television sets every evening, the Smothers Brothers used that platform to speak honestly about the war in Vietnam, racial inequality, political corruption, and the fears of a generation. Growing up in a world full of conflict, their show became a mirror to society, showing both its flaws and its hope. What made their work even more impressive was that they managed to do all of this while still being funny. They didn't preach, they entertained, and in that balance between humor and truth, they found something rare: cultural impact. The writers they nurtured, like Steve Martin and Rob Reiner, carried that spirit forward into shows and films that defined American humor for the next 50 years. Even comedians today, like Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, John Oliver, and Samantha Bee, follow a similar formula, mixing satire with sincerity, holding power accountable while keeping the audience laughing. That template started with the Smothers Brothers. Their battle with CBS wasn't just a fight over scripts or jokes, it was a fight over who gets to decide what's okay to say on national television. It highlighted the power that networks and advertisers hold over creative content, and how easily a powerful voice can be silenced when it becomes uncomfortable. But the Smothers Brothers didn't stay silent. Even after losing their show, they took their fight to court and won. That victory sent a message to the industry. Censorship could be challenged, and creative freedom mattered. It was a landmark moment in the history of entertainment, and one that's still relevant today. As artists continue to fight for the right to speak freely in a world that doesn't always want to listen, the chaotic, unscripted explosion during The Who's performance on their show became a symbol of the era: loud, messy, unfiltered, and unforgettable. But the Smothers Brothers were more than just rebels. They were artists with a mission. They used their fame to lift others up, to give musicians and comedians a chance to be seen and heard in ways that would never have been possible otherwise. They weren't perfect. They made mistakes, but they stood for something real. And that's why their story still matters. In the end, the legacy of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour isn't just about a TV show, it's about standing up for what's right, even when it's risky. It's about using laughter to spark change. And it's about remembering that sometimes the funniest people are the ones telling the hardest truths.